The soldier came home to find the life he had built was nothing but smoke and ash. The hiss of the bus's air brakes was a sound of finality, a sigh of steel and pressure that released him back into a world he only remembered in faded photographs and late-night dreams. Staff Sergeant Caleb Thorne stepped down onto the cracked pavement of the bus station, the air thick with the familiar smell of diesel and damp asphalt. It was a perfume he had longed for in the choking dust of a world away, a scent that meant green trees and the promise of rain, not sand and cordite. He shifted the weight of the duffel bag on his shoulder. It was lighter than his ruck, lighter than his body armor and helmet, but it carried a different kind of mass. It held 2 years of a life lived on high alert, 2 years of letters he'd read until the creases were soft as cloth, and the crushing expectation of a return to normalcy. He had told no one he was coming. Not his business partner, Mark, and not the tenants of the building he co-owned. The surprise was part of the gift, a sudden appearance to prove he was real, solid, and home for good. No more grainy video calls with a 3-second delay. No more disembodied voice crackling over a satellite phone. Just him. Present. Caleb bypassed the taxi stand, the short line of waiting cabs seeming too impersonal, too rushed. He wanted to walk. He needed to feel the ground of his town under his boots, to reacquaint himself with the terrain of his own life. The streets were quiet, draped in the drowsy calm of a weekday afternoon. He walked past Miller's Hardware, its window display of lawnmowers and garden hoses a monument to peaceful, domestic concerns. He saw Mrs. Gable's prize-winning roses spilling over her white picket fence, just as they always had. Each familiar sight was a waypoint, a grid coordinate confirming he was on the right path, moving toward his objective. His objective was a 3-story brick building on the corner of Elm and 6th. The Dakota. It wasn't just an investment, it was his anchor. Before the deployment, he and Mark had poured everything into it, savings, sweat, and endless hours spent patching plaster and refinishing floors. It was supposed to be their future, a foundation of stability built brick by brick. More than that, it was a community. A dozen families, including the Alvarezes on the 2nd floor, a young couple with a little girl named Sophia who had shyly given him a crayon drawing of a soldier before he left. He turned onto Elm Street, his heart rate picking up its cadence like a patrol moving into unsecured territory. He could almost picture it, the surprise on Mark's face, the joyful chaos of telling the tenants he was back. Maybe he would help Mr. Alvarez fix that leaky faucet he'd been complaining about. Simple things. Normal things. But the air changed. A different smell cut through the scent of impending rain. It was acrid and cold. The smell of old smoke, of something deeply and irrevocably burned. It was a smell he knew too well, but it was wrong here. It belonged to the blasted-out shells of compounds and the charred carcasses of vehicles, not to a quiet street in his hometown. He quickened his pace, his boots slapping the pavement with a new, urgent rhythm. A knot of ice formed in his stomach. His instincts, honed by years of threat assessment, screamed that something was off. The sightline was wrong. Where the solid shoulder of his building should have met the sky, there was only empty air. And then he saw it. It wasn't a building anymore. It was a skeleton. A blackened husk standing silhouetted against the grey afternoon sky. The corner of Elm and 6th was a wound in the landscape of his memory. A chain-link fence, stark and industrial, cordoned off the wreckage. Faded yellow police tape, brittle from sun and rain, flapped in the breeze like a tattered prayer flag. Caleb stopped, the duffel bag suddenly feeling impossibly heavy, its straps digging into his shoulder like fingers of dread. He stood before the ruin of his future. The red brick was scorched to a deep, uniform black. The windows were hollow sockets, dark and vacant, staring out at a world they no longer reflected. The roof was gone, collapsed inward, leaving a jagged maw open to the heavens. It was a corpse. His anchor, his foundation, his dream, it was a dead thing on the side of the road. His gaze scanned the perimeter, a reflex he couldn't suppress. He wasn't looking for snipers or IEDs anymore. He was just looking for something that made sense. He saw the spectral outline of the main entrance, the sturdy oak doors now just a memory of ash. Near it, lying on a patch of scorched grass, was a child's tricycle. Its plastic frame was melted into a grotesque, twisted shape, one wheel still stubbornly, defiantly red. Sophia's tricycle. The thought hit him like shrapnel. The air left his lungs in a rush, his knees threatening to buckle. He dropped the duffel bag. It hit the ground with a dull thud, the sound swallowed by the profound silence of the ruin. The carefully constructed soldier, the man who had faced down firefights and ambushes without flinching, felt himself breaking apart on a quiet suburban sidewalk. This wasn't the chaos of war. It was the violation of peace. This was a different kind of enemy, one he didn't know how to fight. His mission had been simple: survive, come home. He had completed the mission. But he had come home to a crater. He felt adrift, a ship with no port, a soldier with no home to return to. The familiar landmarks of his town now seemed like taunts, relics of a life that had existed only in his mind. He needed a fixed point, an anchor in this new, disorienting reality. There was only one place. Sal's. The bar was a small, dark refuge just off Main Street, a place that smelled of stale beer, wood polish, and time. It was run by Sal, a Vietnam veteran with eyes that had seen too much and a demeanor that asked for nothing. Caleb pushed through the door, a small bell announcing his arrival with a weary jingle. Sal was behind the bar, wiping a glass with a practiced, methodical rhythm. He looked up, and his weathered face showed no surprise, only a deep, quiet recognition. He set the glass down. He didn't offer a handshake or a welcome home, he simply took a clean glass, filled it with whiskey, and pushed it across the polished wood toward Caleb. Caleb slumped onto a stool, his body feeling like it was made of lead. He stared into the amber liquid, the distorted reflection of the man in the glass a stranger to him. "I saw the building," Caleb said, his voice raw. Sal nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering. "Figured that's where you'd be coming from. Happened about 6 weeks back." "What happened?" Caleb's voice was barely a whisper. The question was a plea. "Fire," Sal said, his tone flat, delivering the fact like a field report. "Started late. Middle of the night. It went up fast. By the time the trucks got there, it was already lost." He paused, picking up another glass to wipe, his hands needing the motion. "They called it arson." The word hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Arson. Not an accident. A deliberate act. An attack. "Everyone get out," Caleb asked, his throat tight. He was picturing Sophia's melted tricycle. Everyone got out, Sal confirmed, and a small measure of the ice in Caleb's gut thawed. The Alvarezes, the whole lot. Lost everything but the clothes on their backs. The Red Cross put them up for a bit. Now they're at the county shelter, I hear. Relief ward with a fresh wave of cold fury. His tenants were safe, but homeless. Their lives, like his, had been set on fire. "Mark?" Caleb asked, the name feeling like ash in his mouth. "Where was Mark?" Sal stopped wiping the glass. He set it down with a deliberate click and met Caleb's eyes. The look he gave him was one of profound pity. "That's the other part of it, kid. Mark was struggling. Heard he got into some bad business. Took out loans from the wrong kind of people." Caleb felt a new dread creeping in, colder and sharper than what he had felt at the ruin. He had trusted Mark with everything. They were supposed to be partners, brothers in this civilian enterprise. The fire marshals, the cops, they were asking a lot of questions about the insurance policy, Sal continued, his voice low. A big policy. One that would have solved a lot of problems for a man deep in debt. The implication was a physical blow. It was a betrayal so profound it defied comprehension. Mark. The man who had been the best man at his wedding, the friend he'd trusted to safeguard their shared dream. And Mark. Caleb's voice was strained, brittle. "Gone," Sal said simply. "Vanished the day after the fire. Hasn't been seen or heard from since." Caleb stared at his reflection in the whiskey, but he no longer saw himself. He saw the fool who had been fighting a war thousands of miles away while his own life was being burned to the ground by the one man he had left to protect it. He felt a surge of guilt so powerful it was nauseating. He had been so focused on protecting his squad, on keeping them safe, that he had completely failed to see the danger to his own home. He had left his flank exposed, and the enemy had come from within. He downed the whiskey in one searing gulp. The burn in his throat was nothing compared to the fire in his soul. He had a new mission now. It wasn't about rebuilding. It was about finding answers. It was about finding Mark. For 2 days, Caleb existed in a state of suspended animation. He rented a sterile room in a roadside motel that smelled of disinfectant and quiet desperation. He lay on the stiff bedspread, staring at the ceiling, replaying Sal's words like a mission briefing. He was a soldier without a war, a commander with no one to command. The structure and purpose that had defined his existence were gone, replaced by a hollow ache and the ghost of a burning building. He drove past the ruin again and again, the chain-link fence a mocking barrier. He visited the county shelter, a grim, institutional building on the edge of town. He saw families huddled together, their lives packed into plastic bags. He saw the Alvarezes. Maria Alvarez's eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, her husband's shoulders slumped in defeat. Little Sophia clung to her mother's leg, her face solemn, her childhood innocence singed by the flames. He didn't approach them. What could he say? "I'm sorry your home is gone? I'm sorry I trusted the man who did this to you?" The words were inadequate, hollow shells. His apology meant nothing without action, without restitution. The weight of his failure was a physical presence in the room. He was their landlord, their protector in a small way, and he had failed them utterly. He left the shelter with the image of Sophia's sad eyes burned into his memory, another casualty he felt responsible for. On the third night, his phone buzzed. A blocked number. He almost ignored it, but some instinct, some lingering whisper of his training, told him to answer. "Hello?" Silence. Then, a shaky, ragged breath. "Caleb?" The voice was a ghost. Thinner, higher-pitched with panic, but unmistakable. It was Mark. Caleb sat bolt upright on the bed. Every muscle in his body tensed. The hunter had found his quarry. "Mark. Where are you?" His voice was cold, flat steel. "Caleb, I heard you were back," Mark stammered, his words tumbling over each other. "I'm so sorry. I swear, it wasn't supposed to happen like that." "What wasn't supposed to happen, Mark?" Caleb's tone was dangerously quiet. "The part where you burned down our building? Or the part where you make a dozen families homeless?" A sob cracked through the phone. It was a pathetic, broken sound. "I was in trouble, man. Real trouble. These guys, they were going to ruin me. They were going to come after you, too. I was trying to fix it. The insurance. I thought it was the only way out. The only way out was to destroy everything." Caleb's anger was a low, controlled burn. He pictured Mark's face, the easy smile he always wore, and wanted to smash it. "It got out of control," Mark wept. "I just meant to start a small fire. In the basement. Enough for a claim. But it went up so fast. Oh God, Caleb, I ran. I just ran. I've been hiding. I have nothing." The confession poured out, a torrent of weakness and regret. He was hiding in a cheap motel 2 towns over, broke and terrified. He was begging. Begging Caleb to meet him, to help him, to tell him what to do. Here it was. The crossroads. Caleb's entire being screamed for retribution. Call the police. Give them Mark's location. Let justice take its course. It was the clear, correct, and righteous path. Justice for the Alvarezes. Justice for himself. Mark was the enemy, the saboteur who had destroyed their lives. The mission was to neutralize the threat. But as the pathetic, broken sobs echoed through the phone, another instinct surfaced. It was the part of him that had carried a wounded comrade through enemy fire, the part that had sat with a young private who had cracked under pressure. He heard not just a criminal, but a casualty. A man who had faced his own kind of war on the home front, a war of debt, fear, and desperation, and had broken completely. Did he deliver the justice of a righteous warrior? Or did he offer the grim compassion of a fellow survivor who knew how thin the line was between standing tall and falling apart? He looked out the motel window at the dark highway, at the headlights of cars moving toward unknown destinations. His own destination was suddenly unclear. The path of righteous anger was simple and clean. But it felt hollow. It wouldn't rebuild the building. It wouldn't erase the fear from Sophia's eyes. It would only be an act of vengeance. "Stay where you are," Caleb said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Don't move. I'm coming." He hung up the phone. He had made his choice. Not out of forgiveness for Mark, but out of a need to reclaim some sense of order from the chaos. Justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about responsibility. And that was a burden they would now have to carry together. The drive to the neighboring town was a journey through a landscape of moral ambiguity. The neat lines of right and wrong, so clear on the battlefield, were blurred here into shades of grey. Caleb wasn't driving toward an enemy anymore. He was driving toward a wreck, a piece of his own past that had imploded. He found the motel easily, a flickering neon sign advertising vacancies and color television. Mark's room was at the far end, its window dark. Caleb knocked, a sharp, authoritative rap. The door opened a crack, a sliver of a pale, terrified face peering out before it swung open. The man who stood before him was a ghost of his friend. Mark was gaunt, his eyes wide and bloodshot, swimming in a sea of fear and sleeplessness. He smelled of sweat and stale cigarette smoke. The room was a disaster, clothes strewn about, an empty bottle of cheap vodka on its side. Mark flinched as Caleb stepped inside, as if expecting a blow. Caleb simply looked at him, his face an unreadable mask of military discipline. There was no rage left, only a profound, weary sadness. "You did this," Caleb said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, as simple and brutal as a casualty report. Mark crumpled. He didn't just cry, he collapsed into a chair, his body shaking with racking sobs of self-loathing. "I know," he choked out between gasps. "I know. I destroyed everything. Our dream. Those people's homes. God, Caleb, I am so sorry." Caleb stood over him, a silent sentinel. He listened to the confession again, this time in person. The details were uglier, more pathetic. The loan sharks, the escalating threats, the panicked, idiotic plan born of pure desperation. It was the story of a weak man making a terrible choice. Caleb didn't offer a hand of comfort. He didn't offer a word of forgiveness. The damage was too great, the betrayal too deep for such easy salves. Instead, he offered the only thing he had left, the mission. "It's not enough to be sorry, Mark," Caleb said, his voice calm and steady. "Sorry doesn't give the Alvarezes a place to live. Sorry doesn't UN burn a building." Mark looked up, his face a mess of tears and despair. "What do I do? I have nothing. I can't fix it." "You're going to turn yourself in," Caleb stated. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. "You are going to walk into the police station. You are going to tell them everything you just told me. You are going to take responsibility." Mark stared at him, fresh terror dawning in his eyes. "They'll send me to prison." "Yes," Caleb said. "They will. That's justice. But this isn't about you anymore. This is about starting to make things right. It's the only way." He paused, his gaze hard. "I'm not doing this for you, Mark. I'm doing this for them. And for me. I need to know that when everything falls apart, we can at least choose to face the consequences. We can choose order." He saw the fight go out of Mark's eyes, replaced by a flicker of something else. Resignation. Maybe even a sliver of relief. The burden of running was over. "I'll drive you," Caleb said. The immediate crisis was over. Mark was in custody, the legal system grinding into motion. The fire was no longer a mystery, but a crime with a confession. A sense of grim resolution settled over Caleb, but it wasn't victory. It was just the end of one operation and the beginning of another, far more difficult one. Months bled into one another, turning a harsh winter into a tentative spring. The ruin of the Dakota was finally cleared, leaving a clean, empty lot, a scar on the earth where his dream used to be. The insurance was a tangled mess of litigation and investigation, a battle Caleb had little energy for. His focus had shifted. He didn't rebuild the building. Instead, he started rebuilding lives. He sold the land. He took what little he had left from his own savings, combined it with a small loan from a veterans assistance program, and went to work. His new mission had no objective markers or grid coordinates. It was defined by small, meaningful actions. He found the Alvarez's a new apartment, a clean, bright place on the other side of town. He paid the first 3 months' rent and the security deposit himself. He didn't see it as charity, he saw it as back pay for a duty he had failed to perform. He helped the other displaced tenants navigate the bureaucracy of aid agencies, using the discipline and focus the military had taught him to cut through red tape and secure resources for them. He got a job with a local construction crew, trading his rifle for a hammer. The work was hard, physical, and honest. It felt good to build things again, to raise walls instead of watching them burn. His days were spent in the sun and sawdust, and his evenings were often spent at the county shelter, not as a visitor, but as a volunteer. He fixed leaky pipes, patched drywall, and listened to the stories of people who had lost their own anchors. Section he was no longer Staff Sergeant Thorne, a man defined by his past. He was just Caleb, a man trying to build a future, not just for himself, but for the community he was now a part of in a way he never had been before. His home was no longer a building. It was a network of responsibilities, a web of connections to the people around him. One sunny Saturday afternoon, he visited the Alvarezes. Maria met him at the door with a warm smile. Mr. Alvarez, back on his feet with a new job, shook his hand firmly. The apartment smelled of fresh paint and cooking spices. From the small patio, he heard a familiar sound, the happy, whirring rumble of plastic wheels on concrete. He looked out and saw Sophia, riding a brand new, bright red tricycle in joyful, looping circles on the sidewalk below. She was laughing, a pure, carefree sound that filled the empty spaces in his own heart. Caleb watched her, a quiet, unforced smile touching his lips. The weight on his shoulders was still there, the memory of the fire, the ghost of his lost friendship with Mark, the echoes of a war far away. But it was no longer a crushing burden. It was just weight. And he had learned how to carry it. He had a new mission now, one without end. And for the first time since stepping off that bus, he felt like he was finally, truly home.